Miles, Ghost Hunter here, and I need you to listen to me very carefully before we start this one. In 1985, a hunter walking through Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire, found a steel drum. A 55-gallon barrel, the kind you see behind gas stations and industrial lots. Rusted, dented, half buried in dead leaves. Inside that barrel were two bodies, a woman and a little girl. No identification, no wallets, no jewelry with initials, nothing. Just remains, stuffed into a container and dumped in the woods like garbage. Police processed the scene. They ran dental records. They ran fingerprints against every database they had. They cross-referenced missing persons reports from every state in New England. 0 matches anywhere. The woman and the girl simply did not exist in any system. It was as if someone had killed two ghosts. And then, 15 years later, in the year 2000, a detective named John Cleese went back to that same stretch of forest. He had a theory. If the killer dumped one barrel there, maybe he dumped another nearby. Cleese was right. 100 meters from the original site, buried under years of forest debris, they found a second barrel. Same type, same size, same rusted steel. Inside were two more bodies. Another woman, another child. 4 victims, 2 barrels, 1 dump site, separated by at least a decade. And not a single name among them. Not one match in any law enforcement database on Earth. This case would become known as the Bear Brook murders, and it would remain one of the most impenetrable cold cases in American history for a quarter of a century. I am Miles Ghost Hunter, and tonight I am going to show you how a dead man was unmasked as a serial killer, how 4 nameless victims finally got their identities back, and how one human being exploited every single crack in the American system to become invisible. You cannot catch a man who does not exist, but you can catch his DNA. And that is exactly what happened. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of the investigation, the beginning of the victims. Because before they were case numbers and forensic reconstructions, they were people. They had faces, they had lives, and somebody loved them before somebody destroyed them. The woman in the first barrel was eventually identified as Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch. That name would not be known for over 30 years. But when she was alive, Marlise was a young mother from La Puente, California. Born in 1954, dark hair, strong features. A woman who, by all accounts, had a complicated life, but a fierce love for her children. She had 2 daughters, Marie Elizabeth Callahan, born in 1971, and Sarah Lynn McWaters, born in 1977. Marie and Sarah, 2 little girls who should have grown up in California sunshine. Marie was the girl found in the first barrel alongside her mother. She was roughly 6 years old at the time of her death. Sarah was found in the second barrel. She was barely a toddler. But here is the detail that cracked this case wide open, and it would not be understood for decades. The 4th victim, the second child in the second barrel, was not related to Marlise Honeychurch. She was not Marie's sister. She was not Sarah's sister. She was someone else's daughter entirely. Someone had placed an unrelated child into a barrel with this family, which meant the killer had access to at least 2 separate family units, which meant the killer was not a stranger who ambushed people in the woods. The killer was someone who lived with these women, someone who was trusted, someone who was inside the home. And that changes everything. Now let me tell you about the investigation that ran headfirst into a wall of nothing. In 1985, when the first barrel was found, Allenstown, New Hampshire, was a small town, population under 5,000. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked. The discovery of 2 bodies in a steel drum was the most horrific thing that had ever happened there. The New Hampshire State Police took over the case. They were methodical, they were thorough, and they hit dead ends everywhere they turned. First, They tried identification through dental records. In the 1980s, this was the gold standard. You pull dental x-rays from the remains and you compare them against records of missing persons. The problem was simple and devastating. If nobody reported these people missing, there were no records to compare against. And nobody had reported them missing. Nobody. Think about that for a moment. A woman and a child vanish from the face of the earth, and not a single person files a report. Not a family member, not a friend, not a neighbor, not a school, not a doctor. Nobody. That told investigators something chilling. Either these victims had been so isolated that their disappearance went unnoticed, or the person responsible for their deaths was also the person who would have been expected to report them missing. Next, they tried facial reconstruction. Forensic artists built approximations of what the woman and child might have looked like in life. These images were distributed to media outlets across New England, newspapers, television, community boards. Nothing. Not a single tip that led anywhere. They ran the case through the National Crime Information Center, through the FBI's databases, through every regional law enforcement network available at the time. They sent information to police departments in all 50 states. 0 hits. The victims were not in the system. They had no social security numbers that matched. No driver's license records. No birth certificates that aligned with the estimated ages and physical descriptions. In the eyes of the American bureaucratic machine, these two people had never existed, and so the case went cold. Not because detectives stopped caring, not because they gave up, but because every single tool available to law enforcement in the 1980s and 90s could not produce a single lead. The trail was not cold. There was no trail at all. For 15 years, those two bodies sat in evidence, identified only by case numbers. Jane Doe and Child Doe. That was all they had. Then came the year 2000, and that second barrel. Detective John Cleese had been working the Bear Brook case on and off for years. It haunted him. The idea that there might be more victims at that same site had been eating at him. He went back to the woods with a team and a theory. And when they found that second barrel, when they pried open that rusted lid and saw what was inside, the case did not just reopen. It transformed into something much larger and much darker than anyone had imagined. 2 more bodies. Another woman. Another child. Same method, same container, same dump site. But the condition of the remains suggested these bodies had been placed there at a different time than the first barrel. This was not a single event. This was a pattern. The Bear Brook case was no longer a double homicide. It was a quadruple. And the window of time between the 2 barrel deposits could have been years. The media picked up the story. Bear Brook became national news. Tips poured in. Hundreds of them. Each one was checked and cross-referenced, and each one led to the same place. Nowhere. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit took ownership. They brought in the FBI. They brought in forensic anthropologists. They used every advancement in forensic science that had emerged since 1985. Carbon dating to narrow down time of death. Isotopic analysis of bone and tooth enamel to determine where the victims had lived and what they had eaten. Mitochondrial DNA extraction. The isotopic analysis revealed something important. The victims had likely spent significant time in the northeastern United States and possibly in areas with specific water chemistry profiles. This narrowed the geographic scope, but it still did not produce a name. And then the mitochondrial DNA results came back with the detail that would eventually crack the entire case open. The child in the second barrel, the 4th victim, did not share maternal DNA with the woman beside her. That child was not the daughter of either woman in the barrels. This was the anomaly. This was the crack in the wall, because it meant somebody had brought a child from outside this family unit and placed her remains with the others. And the only person who could have done that was the killer. Now the question was not just who killed these people. The question was, whose child is this? And how did the killer obtain her? And for years, even that question had no answer. I want you to understand what it means for a case to be truly, completely, absolutely stuck. Not stuck like a car in mud where you can see the road ahead. Stuck like a submarine on the ocean floor in total darkness, with no instruments and no idea which direction leads to the surface. Detectives had 4 bodies with no names. They had a dump site with no witnesses. They had a method, steel barrels, that was not unique enough to link to any specific individual. They had DNA that matched no one in CODIS, the National DNA Database. They had no murder weapon, no crime scene, no timeline beyond rough estimates. What they did have was patience, and the knowledge that science does not stand still. In 2017, a researcher named Barbara Ray Venter entered the picture. Barbara was not a detective. She was not a police officer. She was a genealogist with a background in biology and law, and she had access to a tool that did not exist when those barrels were first found. Genetic genealogy. Here is how it works. And I want you to grasp this, because it is the key that unlocked everything. Traditional DNA analysis compares a crime scene sample against a database of known offenders. If your DNA is not in the database, you are invisible. But genetic genealogy takes a different approach entirely. It uploads DNA to public genealogy databases, sites where ordinary people voluntarily submit their genetic information to learn about their ancestry. And then it looks for partial matches. Not the suspect themselves, their relatives, distant cousins, third cousins twice removed, people who share enough DNA to indicate a family connection. From those partial matches, genealogists build family trees. They work backward through generations, mapping connections, identifying branches, narrowing down possibilities until they arrive at a single individual who fits the profile. It is detective work performed not with badges and interrogation rooms, but with spreadsheets and ancestry charts, and it is devastatingly effective. Barbara Ray Venter took the DNA from the unrelated child, the 4th victim, and uploaded it to a genealogy database. She began building family trees from the partial matches that came back, and the results led to a man. Not a man in a database, not a man with a criminal record that flagged him as a suspect. A man who had been buried under so many layers of false identities that no conventional investigation could have ever found him. His name was Terry Rasmussen. But that was just the beginning, because Terry Rasmussen was not one person. He was a dozen. Let me peel back the layers of this man's life, and I want you to count the identities as we go. Count them, and then ask yourself how a single human being moved through American society for decades, leaving bodies behind, and no one connected the dots. Terry Peter Rasmussen was born in 1943 in Denver, Colorado. That much is verified. His early life is poorly documented, which is itself a pattern. The man who would later erase his identity over and over again started with very little identity to begin with. By the late 1970s, Rasmussen was living in various locations across the United States, and this is where the trail of names begins. Name number 1, Terry Rasmussen, his birth name, used sporadically, mostly in his younger years. Name number 2, Bob Evans. This is the identity he used in New Hampshire, where he would commit some of his most devastating crimes. Name number 3, Larry Vanner, used in Connecticut. Name number 4, Curtis Kimball, used in various locations. Name number 5, Gordon Jenson, used at different points. There were others. Authorities believe there were identities they never uncovered. Each time Rasmussen moved to a new town, he shed his old name like a snake sheds skin. He obtained false documents. He fabricated work histories. He built entirely new personas from scratch. And in each town, in each life, women and children entered his orbit, and some of them never came out. Let me take you to 1981, Manchester, New Hampshire. A woman named Denise Bowden lived there with her boyfriend. Her boyfriend's name, as far as anyone knew, was Bob Evans. Denise Bowden was 24 years old. She had a baby daughter. She was, by all descriptions, a quiet woman in a difficult relationship. And on Thanksgiving Day, 1981, Denise Bowden vanished. Her family reported her missing. But here is the critical detail. Bob Evans, the boyfriend, told Denise's family that she had simply left, walked out, abandoned him and the baby. And Denise's family, for reasons that are difficult to understand but tragically common, accepted this explanation. They accepted it because Bob Evans still had the baby, and he continued to raise that child as his own daughter. He moved with her to another town, changed his name again, enrolled her in school, attended parent-teacher conferences, lived as a single father. For years, that little girl grew up believing Bob Evans was her father. She had no idea that her real mother had been reported missing. She had no idea that the man feeding her dinner and driving her to school had likely killed Denise Bowden and disposed of her body. She had no idea because he had stolen not just her mother's life, but her own identity. She grew up under a false name, with a false history, raised by the man who destroyed her family. And the system never caught it. Not once. Not a single background check. Not a single welfare visit. Not a single school administrator who questioned why this man's documentation did not quite add up. He walked through every checkpoint in American society with a forged identity and a stolen child, and every door opened for him. Now let me take you to what we believe happened to Marlise Honeychurch, Marie Callahan, and Sarah McWaters. Marlise Honeychurch was from California. She met Terry Rasmussen at some point in the late 1970s or early 1980s. The exact circumstances are not fully documented. What is known is that Marlise and her two daughters, Marie and Sarah, ended up in Rasmussen's orbit in New Hampshire. And then, they disappeared. Marlise's family lost contact with her. Like Denise Bowden's family, they were told she had moved on. Like Denise Bowden's family, they accepted it. Because what was the alternative? To believe that the man she was living with had killed her and her children and stuffed their bodies into steel drums. Nobody thinks that. Nobody's mind goes there. And that is exactly what predators like Rasmussen depend on. The timeline, as reconstructed by investigators, places the deaths of Marlise, Marie, and Sarah somewhere between 1980 and 1984. Their bodies were placed in the barrels and transported to Bear Brook State Park. Rasmussen chose that location because it was remote, wooded, and accessible by road. He could drive to the site, unload the barrels, and leave without being seen. The fourth victim, the unrelated child in the second barrel, has been identified as the daughter of Rasmussen himself, conceived with an unknown woman. This means Rasmussen killed his own biological child and placed her remains alongside the family he had already destroyed. I want you to sit with that for a moment. This man killed at least 4 people, including children, including his own child, and then walked away, changed his name, started over, found new women, found new victims, and the system let him do it every single time. After New Hampshire, the trail of Terry Rasmussen moves to other states. Under the name Larry Vanner, he surfaced in Connecticut in the mid-1980s. He was charismatic, likable even. People who met him described him as friendly, outgoing, the kind of guy who could talk his way into any room and any relationship. In Connecticut, he lived with a woman named Unsoon June. She was a businesswoman, intelligent, capable. She and Rasmussen, known to her as Larry Vanner, had what appeared to be a normal relationship. And then, in 2002, Unsoon June was found dead. Her body was discovered in a closet of the home she shared with Rasmussen. She had been wrapped in plastic and surrounded by kitty litter and baking soda, an attempt to control decomposition and mask the odor. Larry Vanner, the man she knew, had vanished. He had already moved on. New state, new name. But this time, unlike in New Hampshire, police had a crime scene. They had forensic evidence. They had DNA, and they had a description of the suspect. What they did not have was a real name. Larry Vanner did not exist. The social security number he had used was fabricated. The work history was fictional. The man that Eun Soon Jun had loved and trusted was a character, a performance, a mask worn by someone whose real face nobody in law enforcement had ever seen. It who he really was. Throughout his incarceration, prison officials knew him as Larry Vanner. They knew he had killed a woman in Connecticut. They knew his identity was false, but they could not crack it. He refused to cooperate. He refused to provide his real name. He sat in his cell, and he kept his secrets. In 2010, Terry Rasmussen, still known to the prison system as Larry Vanner, died behind bars. Heart failure. He was 67 years old. He died without ever being connected to the Bear Brook murders. He died without ever being connected to the disappearance of Denise Bowden. He died without anyone knowing that the man in that California prison cell was responsible for at least 6 deaths across multiple states and multiple decades. He took it all with him. Or so he thought. Because 7 years after his death, Barbara Ray Venter's genetic genealogy work connected the DNA from the Bear Brook barrels to the dead prisoner in California. The daughter in the barrel was his biological child. The DNA did not lie. It could not lie. And once that connection was made, the wall of anonymity that Rasmussen had built over a lifetime came crashing down in a matter of months. Investigators pulled his prison records. They extracted his DNA from archived samples. They ran it against every unsolved case they could find. They traced his movements through decades of false identities, piecing together the trail of Bob Evans, Larry Vanner, Curtis Kimball, Gordon Jenson, and finally, Terry Rasmussen. The picture that emerged was staggering. Let me reconstruct it for you now. The full picture, the real timeline, from beginning to end. Late 1970s. Terry Rasmussen is in his mid-30s. He is living under various names in the American West and Northeast. He has learned that the American identity system is built on trust. If you present a social security number, people accept it. If you fill out a form with a name and a date of birth, nobody checks. If you move to a new town and introduce yourself as Bob or Larry or Curtis, people take you at your word. He has also learned something darker. He has learned that certain people, women who are isolated, women without strong family connections, women in difficult circumstances, can disappear without triggering alarms. Because the system that tracks identity is the same system that tracks disappearances. And if you are invisible in one, you are invisible in the other. 1980 or 81. Rasmussen, now calling himself Bob Evans, is living in New Hampshire. He meets Marlise Honeychurch. She has 2 young daughters. She is far from her family in California. She is vulnerable in the way that predators recognize instantly, not because she is weak, but because she is alone. At some point, Rasmussen kills Marlise, Marie, and Sarah. The exact date is unknown. The exact method is known only through forensic evidence, and I will not describe it in detail. What I will tell you is that their bodies were placed into 55-gallon steel drums and transported to Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. He also kills his own biological daughter, the 4th victim. He places her in the 2nd barrel. Whether both barrels were deposited at the same time or at different times remains a subject of investigation. The forensic evidence suggests they may have been placed there on separate occasions, which means Rasmussen returned to the same dump site. He was confident enough in its concealment to come back. With Marlise and her daughters gone, Rasmussen moves on. 1981, Thanksgiving Day. Rasmussen, still operating as Bob Evans, is now with Denise Bowden. She is 24. She has a baby daughter. On that day, Denise disappears. Rasmussen tells her family she left voluntarily. He takes the baby. He raises Denise Bowden's daughter for years. She grows up not knowing her real name, not knowing her mother is dead, not knowing the man she calls father is a killer. Eventually, Rasmussen moves on again. He abandons the girl, now a young woman, and resurfaces in another state with another name. She is left to build a life on a foundation of lies he constructed. Mid-1980s through 1990s. Rasmussen drifts. He surfaces in California, in Connecticut, in other states. Under Larry Vanner, under Curtis Kimball, under names that investigators may never fully catalogue. He works odd jobs. He meets women. He is, by all accounts, charming when he wants to be. The kind of man who makes you feel like you are the center of his world. And then, in 2002, Eun Soon Jun is found dead in her home in Richmond, California, wrapped in plastic, hidden in a closet. The man she knew as Larry Vanner is gone. California police investigate. They identify Larry Vanner as the suspect. They issue warrants. They search. And eventually they find him. He is arrested. He is tried. He is convicted of second-degree murder. He is sentenced to 15 years to life. He enters the California Department of Corrections. And from the moment he walks through those prison gates, he refuses to tell anyone who he really is. Guards ask. Investigators ask. He smiles. He deflects. He says nothing. In 2010, he dies. The secret dies with him, or so the world assumes. 7 years of silence. 7 years where the Bear Brook barrels sit in evidence, the victims still nameless, the case still frozen. 7 years where Denise Bowden's name sits in a missing persons file that nobody is actively working. 7 years where the connection between a dead prisoner in California and 4 bodies in New Hampshire exists only in the strands of DNA that nobody has yet thought to compare. And then, Barbara Ray Venter begins her work. I want to walk you through what she did, because it is one of the most extraordinary pieces of investigative work in the history of American criminal justice. And it was done not by a police officer, not by an FBI agent, but by a genealogist with a laptop and a database. She took the DNA profile from the unrelated child in the second barrel, the 4th victim, the one who did not match the Honeychurch family. She uploaded that profile to GED Match, a public genetic genealogy database where hundreds of thousands of people had voluntarily submitted their DNA to trace their family histories. She was looking for partial matches, not the child's parents necessarily. Cousins, second cousins, third cousins, anyone who shared enough genetic material to indicate a family connection. The matches came back, dozens of them, each one a thread, each thread leading to a branch of a family tree. And Barbara Ray Venter began to build. She cross-referenced birth records, marriage records, census data, obituaries. She mapped family lines backward through generations, identifying common ancestors, tracing descendants forward, narrowing the pool of potential parents for this unnamed child. The work took months. It required the patience of a watchmaker and the instincts of a detective. One wrong turn in a family tree could send the entire investigation down a dead-end branch that would waste weeks. But she did not make wrong turns. She followed the DNA, and the DNA led her to a family, and that family led her to a man, Terry Peder Rasmussen, born 1943, Denver, Colorado. She cross-referenced the name against criminal databases, and there it was. Larry Vanner, the man who died in a California prison in 2010, the man nobody could identify, was Terry Rasmussen. And Terry Rasmussen's DNA was a paternal match for the 4th victim in the Bear Brook barrels. He had killed his own child. The moment that connection was confirmed, the dam broke. Investigators in New Hampshire pulled every record they could find on Terry Rasmussen, every alias, every address, every known associate. They mapped his movements across decades and across state lines. They found the connection to Bob Evans. They found the connection to Denise Bowden. They found the connection to Marlise Honeychurch, and for the first time in over 30 years, the victims in the barrels began to get their names back. Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, identified through DNA comparison with living relatives in California who had submitted samples to genealogy databases. Marie Elizabeth Callahan, Marlise's daughter, identified through the same maternal line. Sarah Lynn McWaters, Marlise's younger daughter, identified. The fourth victim, Rasmussen's biological daughter, has been identified by her paternal connection, but her mother remains unknown. She was a baby. She never had a chance to become anyone. She was born, and she was killed, and she was stuffed into a steel barrel by the man who fathered her. And Denise Bowden, the woman who vanished on Thanksgiving 1981. Her remains have never been found. She is still missing. She is presumed dead. Terry Rasmussen is the only suspect. But Denise Bowden's daughter, the baby he stole, the child he raised under a false name, she was found. She was alive. She was a grown woman living in the United States, and she had spent her entire life not knowing who she really was. She did not know her mother's name. She did not know her own birth name. She had been told a story by a man she believed was her father, and that story was a lie from the first word to the last. When investigators contacted her and told her the truth, they did not just solve a cold case. They detonated a bomb in the center of a human life. Everything she knew about herself, her name, her family, her origin, was fiction, written by a serial killer. Now I need you to understand something about how Terry Rasmussen operated, because it reveals a flaw in the American system that has never been fully repaired. Rasmussen did not use sophisticated forgery. He did not have connections to organized crime or intelligence agencies. He did not have access to advanced technology. He was not a master hacker or a genius counterfeiter. He lied. That is all he did. He lied on forms. He made up social security numbers. He invented work histories. He walked into new towns and introduced himself with a new name, and nobody checked, nobody verified. Nobody called the Social Security Administration to confirm his number was real. Nobody contacted his supposed previous employers. Nobody ran a background check. In the United States for most of the 20th century, identity was built on a system of trust. You are who you say you are until someone proves otherwise. And for a man like Rasmussen, that system was an open door. He exploited it over and over and over again. Every time he killed, he simply walked away and became someone new. And because his victims were women and children who were already on the margins of society, women without strong family networks, women who had moved frequently, women whose disappearances could be explained away with a shrug and a lie, the system never connected the dots. Think about how many times the system had a chance to catch him. When he showed up at a school to enroll Denise Bowden's daughter under a false name, someone could have asked for a birth certificate and verified it. They did not. When he applied for jobs under fabricated social security numbers, an employer could have run a check. They did not. When Denise Bowden's family reported her missing, police could have investigated Bob Evans more thoroughly. They did not. When he surfaced in Connecticut as Larry Vanner, someone could have noticed that his documentation did not add up. They did not. Every checkpoint failed. Every safeguard was made of paper. And Terry Rasmussen walked through all of them with blood on his hands and a new name on his lips. You want to know the final count? Here is what investigators believe, and I want to be precise because this matters. Confirmed victims connected to Terry Rasmussen: Marlise Elizabeth Honeychurch, Marie Elizabeth Callahan, Sarah Lynn McWaters, his unnamed biological daughter, Unsoon June. That is 5 confirmed dead. Denise Bowden is presumed dead, but her body has never been found. That brings the likely total to 6. Investigators believe there may be more. In the decades that Rasmussen moved across the country under false names, there are gaps in his timeline. periods of months or years where his whereabouts are unknown. And in some of the places where he is known to have lived, there are unsolved disappearances that have never been explained. The full scope of Terry Rasmussen's crimes may never be known. He is dead. He cannot confess. And the trail of false identities he left behind is so tangled, so deliberately obscured, that unraveling it completely may be impossible. But here is what haunts me about this case, and I think it should haunt you too. The system that allowed Terry Rasmussen to exist, the identity infrastructure of the United States, has been updated since his time. Social security verification is more robust. Background checks are more common. DNA databases are larger, but the fundamental vulnerability remains. If you are a person on the margins, a person without strong community ties, a person whose disappearance would not trigger an immediate and aggressive response, you are still at risk. Because the system still depends, at its core, on someone noticing, someone caring, someone asking the right question at the right time. And for Marlise Honeychurch, and Marie Callahan, and Sarah McWaters, and Denise Bodin, and Yoon Soon Jun, and that unnamed baby girl in the barrel, nobody asked, nobody noticed, and nobody cared enough, soon enough, to stop the man who was destroying them. 4 bodies in 2 barrels, 25 years of silence. A killer who died behind bars without ever being connected to his worst crimes. And a genealogist with a laptop who did what the entire American law enforcement apparatus could not. That is the Bear Brook case. That is Terry Rasmussen, the Chameleon killer. The man who lived as many men and died as no one. And the next time someone tells you the system works, the next time someone assures you that people do not just disappear in America, remember those barrels in the woods of New Hampshire. Remember the rust. Remember the silence. Remember how long it took for anyone to hear the names of the dead. And now, before you click away, let me tell you what is coming in the next episode. A woman in the quiet suburbs of the American South. 3 husbands, 3 funerals, every single one ruled natural causes. The insurance payouts totaled over $1 million. Neighbors called her a saint. She baked pies for the church. She organized charity drives. She wept beautifully at every funeral. But the 4th husband got suspicious, and what the toxicology report revealed will make your blood freeze in your veins. Episode 18, The Black Widow. Subscribe now, because this one is going to destroy everything you think you know about the person sleeping next to you. I am Miles Ghost Hunter, and I will see you in the dark.